I am Rib Hankak. Me and my colleagues, we are going to talk about tubal misconnection. Let's start with hazards of tubal misconnection. In healthcare setting, medical devices are connected to the patient for purposes of delivering medication, gases, and intra-nutrition. These devices are frequently have a similar and often identical connectors. The multitude of similar connectors in a clinical environment may lead to a patient care provider to connect to the two devices which have different intended purpose, thus leading to misconnection. In April 2006, Joint Commission International for Hospital Accreditation issued a Sentinel Event Alert, tubing misconnection, a persistent and potentially deadly occurrence. Medical lines and tubing are abundant in clinical practice. Tubing can be a potential source of hazard when they are dislodged or misconnected. Many tubes we are using in clinical practice as nasogastric tubes, peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis lines, central venous lines, arterial lines, and epidural catheters. Patient injury and death have occurred when different device delivery systems mistakenly connected to each other, like connecting feeding tube to IV access. Patient sepsis, neurological damage, renal impairment, respiratory distress, hypoxia, and even respiratory arrest can happen. Thanks, and let's move to the next part.
It's Shuru, and I'll talk about incidents of tubing misconnection in healthcare. Tubing catheters and syringes are a fundamental aspect of daily healthcare provision for the delivery of medications and fluids to patients. The design of these devices, it's possible to accidentally connect the wrong syringes and tubing and then deliver medication or fluid through unintended and therefore wrong route. Though these errors are highly preventable and can be often easily averted, multiple reports of patient injury and deaths from such wrong route medication errors indicate that they occur with relatively frequency 1 to 7. According to WHO Collaborating Center for Patient Safety Solutions, in the United States, 9 cases of a tubing misconnection involving 7 adults and 2 infants have been reported to the Joint Commission Sentinel Events Database, resulting in 8 deaths and 1 permanent loss of function. Examples include 4 cases of specific misconnection involving an enteric tubing feeding into an IV catheter, 2 cases of blood pressure insufflator tube connected to an IV catheter, and 1 case of injection of intravenous fluid into a tracheotomy cuff inflation tube. In the UK, between 2001 and 2004, there were 3 reports of deaths, and from 1997 to 2004, there were 4 reports of harm or near misses following wrong route errors when oral liquid medicines, feeds, and flashes were administered IV. A review of the National Reporting and Learning System in the UK identified 32 reported incidents in which oral liquid medicines were administered by the IV route, 7 incidents in which epidural medication administered via IV route, 6 incidents in which IV medication was administered via the epidural route from January 2005 to May 2006, and now with prevention strategies with Dr. A.
So now that we went through the hazard and the incidents, using this knowledge is the real power. So let's talk about prevention strategies. Both JCI and ISO made standards to address tubal misconnections. WHO made tubing misconnections number 7 in its patient safety solutions. Prevention strategies in healthcare facilities. Ensuring systems, policies, and procedures in place. Emphasize that only clinical staff is allowed to connect or disconnect devices. Require caregivers to trace all lines from patient to the point of origin before connecting any device. Include a standardized line reconciliation process as part of handover communication. Label high-risk catheters and bar the use of standard lower connection syringes to administer oral medication or enteric feedings. Address healthcare workers' fatigue and take appropriate action. Provide training on identified hazards and take time to make the staff familiar with medical equipment. Use risk assessment to identify potential for misconnections and use failure mode effect analysis to promote purchasing equipment that are designed to enhance safety. Manufacturers too bear responsibility, from designing dissimilar tubes to be physically impossible to connect, to preventive strategies and performing risk assessments, specific labeling and standardized color coding too. Thank you for listening, and now let us proceed to monitoring and evaluating effectiveness of prevention with Dr. Shaimaa.
How to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of prevention. So tubing misconnection are at once a practice issue, a manufacturing issue, and what we talk about is a regulatory issue. How to monitor? We will use an assessment tool process flow consisting of planning, data collection, analysis, and implementation. For the planning, we should check awareness of the staff of the importance of the mist tubing. We should make multidisciplinary committee, and lastly determine the scope of our assessment. For the data collection, so we will use what's called risk priority number. This risk priority number will consist of ease of connection scale times potential harm. Each of connection scale from 1 to 5, 1 unable to connect and 5 very easy to connect, times the potential harm, 1 is no harm and 5 will be the high harm. After data collection, we will enter it in a data collection sheet in the form of analysis, Excel spreadsheet, which will calculate the RPN, form risk rating graph, and risk priority summary. So an example for this is connection type for IV tubing, device respiratory nebulizer in the ICU. The ease of connection is 3, the potential harm is 4, so risk priority is 12. It's done daily, so 2 registered nurses should check it to check the connection. And lastly, the implementation, we should have an action plan. The aim is to increase staff awareness and decrease the risk of misconnection in the form of listing the barriers, recovery strategies, maintenance plans for the machines, policy and guidelines for selection of tubing, and educational campaigns. Thank you very much. You should report and be proactive.